Immigration politics has taken a new turn in 2022. With a record-breaking 2.4 million crossings at the US-Mexico border this year, Republican governors came up with what they thought was a clever tactic.
As of today, we've sent 45 buses to Washington, D.C., and there's a whole lot more where that's coming from.
But New York City has also been on the receiving end of those buses.
The governor of Texas has decided to use individuals who have risked their lives to get to America as political pawns and shove them into buses and ship them here to New York to make a cheap political point.
Pitting mayors and governors against each other.
New York City is being forced to bear far more than its share of this national crisis.
We have an open invitation to the mayor to come see the border and see firsthand what they're dealing with.
But it turns out this isn't just a page out of the Republican playbook. Democratic cities like El Paso are also busing migrants to ease what they consider a humanitarian crisis on their border community.
This is not an El Paso issue. This is a federal government issue.
Cut the political crap. It's humanitarian, and we got to figure out how to deal with it.
In partnership with the El Paso Times and immigration reporter Lauren Villagran, we take you inside an unfolding crisis.
Ayer, que habla de cómo los están moviendo, que es un engaño terrible.
Ella es Lawrence, con ella trabajo, reportera.
Hola, buenos días.
I've been covering immigration for over a decade. I've reported on the many groups of people who have risked their lives to cross the border into the U.S., like Haitians, Hondurans, and Cubans.
Vi que ya recibiste mi mensaje. Dime dónde están.
But over the past few months, a dramatic increase of Venezuelans seeking asylum is fueling a crisis at the border, and most of them are being bused to cities in the Northeast. I wanted to understand what's been happening on our side of the border.
Claudio, ¿cómo estás?
Claudio Herrera with the U.S. Border Patrol walked me through a new mobile processing center at the border between El Paso and Juarez. It was built to handle the recent surge of migrants.
This is Rio Grande. This is the border in between Mexico and the United States.
The river is the actual line between the U.S. and Mexico.
All afternoon, I saw migrants wading through the cold water and turning themselves in. It was a calm, almost routine act.
¿Alguien herido? ¿Alguien que necesite atención médica? ¿Algún padecimiento médico? ¿Está todo el mundo en buen estado de salud? Ok, qué bueno, qué bueno. Bueno, pásenle por acá.
What kind of traffic have you been seeing in this particular area?
Lately, in El Paso sector has seen an average of encounters go up to 2,100 a day. Mostly of those encounters are Venezuelan nationals.
Until recently, Venezuelans couldn't be expelled. That's because the U.S. doesn't have diplomatic ties with Venezuela, the way it does with most Central and South American countries. The U.S. had been obligated to take them in temporarily, while they applied for legal asylum. When word got out that the U.S. wouldn't turn Venezuelans away, they showed up at the border by the thousands.
¿Cuántos de ustedes son de Venezuela, puedo preguntar? Todos, absolutamente todos.
Y la verdad, me encuentro acá hoy porque la situación económica en el país es muy difícil. Viendo que la inmigración estaba acá, estaban aceptando a los venezolanos, empezamos a vender los bienes que teníamos, que fue la casa, y logramos reunir el dinero para poder emigrar.
Venezuela is a country in collapse. Years of violence and political instability under the repressive regime of Nicolás Maduro have left the country in economic ruin. And dire food and medicine shortages have caused desperation.
Venimos a matar a Maduro.
more than 6 million Venezuelans, about 1/5 of the country's population, have fled over the past 8 years, making it one of the top 3 migration crises in the world, along with Syria and Ukraine.
We have seen people that are coming and they haven't been able to eat for at least 1 or 2 days. Our purpose is to provide the most efficient and easiest way for the family units and the unaccompanied children to start their immigration process faster.
El Paso, Texas is the gateway city for many migrants. It sits right on the US-Mexico border, next to Ciudad Juarez. In recent months, the city of 700,000 people has been struggling with an influx of tens of thousands of Venezuelans seeking asylum. And in August, El Paso started its own busing program to ease the burden. Here in this nondescript warehouse in northeast El Paso, more than 150 men, women, and children await city-sponsored buses that will take them to New York City and Chicago. For the migrants I speak with, a free bus ride is like winning the lottery.
El pasaje para el destino de nosotros, que es Nueva York, no contamos con eso. Y de verdad le damos gracias a ellos por el alimento que nos dan mientras esperamos nuestro bus.
Katiuska, Christian, and their 2 young children fled Venezuela in mid-September, leaving behind their entire extended family. Christian worked in fast food, Katiuska in a hair salon. She tells me they just couldn't survive.
Con un mes de trabajo no podía comprar un mes de comida. Nada más compraba una semana. Todo se volvió muy, se trancaron muchas cosas, pues. Vendemos lo único que tenemos para llegar hasta aquí.
The family journeyed for 27 days, mostly by bus and foot from Venezuela through Central America to the US-Mexico border.
No se mueva, no se mueva. En el nombre de Dios, todo bien.
They recorded this video with their children by their side, traveling through dangerous jungle terrain, sleeping whenever, wherever they could, all with one eye toward this singular moment.
I'd like to ask you how you feel being here in the United States.
Feliz, feliz y le doy la gloria a Dios, pues, porque Él lo hizo real. Eso.
Ok, vengan.
I wasn't allowed to ride with them on the bus, but that doesn't mean our story stops here. Katiuska and Christian agreed to take a phone and small camera from us, offering a rare glimpse into the 2,200-mile journey to New York.
Vamos ya aquí en el bus para nuestro destino para Nueva York. Fíjate, ¿estás feliz? Sí.
Our plan? To try and find them when they arrive.
Les quiero desear con todo mi corazón lo mejor de su vida, que realicen sus sueños y que puedan superarse aquí en los Estados Unidos. Que Dios me los bendiga y muy buena suerte.
This young family has a chance at a new life, but with no money and no place to stay, they're headed into the unknown.
Bueno, ya nos vamos. Ya nos vamos. En el nombre de Dios. Familia.
The city of El Paso and Texas Governor Greg Abbott have sent hundreds of buses to Chicago, Washington, D.C., and New York. It's caused the Democratic mayors of those cities to speak out in anger.
Governor Abbott's racist and xenophobic practices of expulsion have only amplified the challenges many of these migrants have experienced on their journey to find a safe place.
El Paso, the city manager, the mayor, they should stop sending buses to New York.
I decided to ask the mayor of El Paso about why he started his busing program.
Now, we know that Governor Greg Abbott is also sending buses to New York, but the mayor of New York singled you out for El Paso's busing of migrants to New York.
Last month, we had 49,000 asylum seekers come into our community. This month, we were tracking between 65,000 and 70,000. This is not an El Paso issue. This is a federal government issue.
The current mayor is a Democrat. But I also wanted to get a Republican perspective in El Paso. So I spoke to the city's former mayor.
Hi, Lauren. How are you?
Hi, Dee. It's good to see you.
Nice to see you. Welcome. Come on in.
Thank you.
I love how the mayor of Washington and the mayor of New York talk about this tragic, overwhelming problem for them and the dollars it's costing them when it's been costing the border for several years, the same thing over and over, and they're less equipped with a smaller financial capability.
Dee Margo is a longtime Republican, but he disagrees with his party's hardline rhetoric on immigration.
I thought Trump, he might shake things up and do something, and I was hopeful there. Nada. And here we are under President Biden. Both houses, both parties, all their leadership, everybody is culpable. There needs to be action taken. It's just a political football that for whatever reason, both sides like to punt.
Wow, qué lindo. Qué lindo. Nueva York.
As the young Venezuelan family travels cross-country, they send cell phone videos.
Hace frío, amiga. Bueno, aquí estamos en una parada, no sé exactamente.
Y aquí botando humo.
While they try to stay positive, they're exhausted from not sleeping and being on the road for more than a month. Their first impressions of America are dominated by pit stops and gas station bathrooms. During this marathon of a bus ride, Cristian describes a harrowing experience at the border of Colombia and Panama, where he says his family narrowly escaped death by just a couple of hours.
Nosotros pasamos por un punto que le dicen Tres Bocas, como a las 11 de la mañana. A las 9 de la mañana, mano, habían hecho una matanza, habían matado niños, habían matado mujeres, al tío del niño. Horrible, mano, horrible.
After 40 hours on the road, they finally approach New York City.
Wow, qué lindo. Qué lindo.
It's an idyllic vision of a city that's welcomed immigrants for centuries.
Nueva York.
But what the family doesn't know is that their arrival is challenging New York's standing as a sanctuary city for all.
We now have a situation where more people are arriving in New York City than we can immediately accommodate.
I'm never going to support the idea of turning people in need away. It's just wrong. It's just wrong. Look, individuals who have swam through rivers, who have fled from incredible violence to get to this country because they believe it is someplace better, well, that's the definition of hope.
Over the past several months, I've heard chaotic stories from New York City, that its overburdened shelter system couldn't handle the tens of thousands of migrants suddenly showing up. To find out what will happen to Cristian, Katiuska, and their children in New York, my colleague, photojournalist Omar Ornelas, and I travel there. So it's 4:15 in the morning, and we are driving to the Port Authority in Manhattan, where we expect the bus from El Paso to arrive in the next couple of hours. We'll be waiting. At the bus terminal, the first people we notice are volunteers. Power Malu says they show up here every day so the migrants feel welcome and cared for.
This country was built off the backs of immigrants, and we want to let them know that we have their back, and we're going to be here for them. We're going to advocate for them because we know that if we're not here every day, people can fall through the cracks.
By 8 a.m., Katiuska sends a message. They're just minutes away.
They've arrived and should be here any minute.
Queremos que ustedes sepan que sí están bienvenidos aquí en Nueva York.
Power is the first one to greet them. We aren't allowed in, but Katiuska films the registration process. They're relieved to have made it so far, but they don't know where they'll end up or what the conditions will be like.
Hey, what's Brittany?
And most importantly, if they'll even be able to stay. New York City is required by law to provide housing for all homeless people, but the city has been struggling. It built an 80,000 square foot tent shelter and turned dozens of hotels into emergency housing. By the beginning of October, a staggering 17,000 migrants had been bused to Manhattan. New York had reached a tipping point, and the mayor declared a state of emergency.
We are in a crisis situation. New York City now has more than 61,000 people in our shelter system.
His office declined our request for an interview and directed us to his press conferences on YouTube.
We were in a bad upward spiral before all of this started.
Christine Quinn is the former Speaker of the City Council, who now runs the largest nonprofit network of family shelters in New York. It's housing hundreds of migrant families.
And now it's one of those crises or emergencies you couldn't have anticipated, but has us, totally tapped out. I think the story here is that the city can do better, but look, we haven't turned anybody away. That's not what we do as New York.
The majority of migrants will end up in the city's notoriously dangerous public shelter system. These cell phone videos capture the chaos. Here, an altercation between a guard and a migrant quickly escalates, and police are called. It ends with one migrant going to the hospital. The videos were shared by local advocates, along with this photo that shows migrants sleeping on the floor.
Pero son como corredores donde hay una cama, otra cama al lado, otra cama, 50 camas hacia el lado de una. Como si fuera una prisión, exactamente. No hay privacidad para nada.
Johnny Ramos knows firsthand how hard life is in New York City shelters. He's a Venezuelan asylum seeker who was forced to separate from his brother after he entered the system.
Se presenciaba fumadera, presenciaba que entraban licor. Porque está bien, tú puedes fumar o puedes beber, pero fuera de la instalación. Eres una persona que quiere trabajar, pero ¿cómo tú vas a permitir que dormir al lado de una persona que se vive drogando o se vive alcoholizando? ¿Sí me entiendes? Era difícil.
Johnny cycled through 3 different facilities in 3 months and told us that he and other migrants felt discriminated against. In part, he said, because they couldn't speak English.
Dale comida, coge comida.
New York City's many volunteers understand the harsh conditions that migrants face.
We got some delicious food. It's rice and chicken, and we got rice and chickpeas.
5 times a week, Power Malu delivers hot meals to migrants outside shelters. The food comes from a local nonprofit called Evie Loves NYC.
We follow up with families. We make sure that they're okay in whatever situation that they're in, whether they're in family members' house or they're in the shelter system. There you go, brother. Enjoy, okay? Good night, brother. For us, it's about getting away from the politics. For us, it's about teaching people to not play hot potato with people's lives. It's about being all in and really welcoming people like New York is supposed to welcome them.
As soon as we can get these folks legal status, trust me, they're all gonna go out and find a job. I've never seen folks who are so hungry to work.
In mid-October, under increasing political pressure, the Biden administration brokered a deal that allowed the U.S. to return Venezuelan migrants back to Mexico.
Those who attempt to cross the southern border of the United States illegally will be returned. Those who follow the lawful process we announced yesterday will have the opportunity to travel safely to the United States and become eligible to work here.
The Biden administration is using a controversial Trump-era policy called Title 42. It started during the pandemic to mitigate COVID risks. But even as the pandemic has waned, the policy has been used to turn away hundreds of thousands of migrants this year alone. Up until recently, it didn't apply to Venezuelans. On the ground in Juarez, the mood is somber. Here, dozens of Venezuelans are coming to terms with a new reality, that they won't be allowed into the U.S. after spending weeks trying to get there.
Yo considero que la mayoría de todos los que estamos aquí no sabemos ni qué pensar, ni qué hacer, en quizás tener aún estando aquí deportados por una respuesta y por una oportunidad de que ese acceso pueda volver a abrirse y poder entrar.
Days after the Biden policy was implemented, far fewer migrants were ending up in El Paso. And in late October, the city suspended its busing program. It turns out Katiuska and Cristian were on one of the last buses.
Yo entré el 10 y el 12 ya no podía entrar más nadie. O sea que si yo me retraso un poquito más, me quedo en México, con mis hijos, sin comida, sin techo, sin nada, imagínate eso. Pero nosotros, Dios es grande y nos ayudó.
There was no space in a family shelter for Katiuska, Cristian, and their children, so they ended up in a hotel paid for by the city. We visited them and filmed this video on our cell phone. The hotel is clean and it's safe, though the room has no kitchen and is around 200 square feet.
Muy bonito, la estructura, los edificios, todo, pero lo que me gané mi primer sueldo, que me den mi buzón, mi broma de dinero y voy a ayudar a mi familia, mis hijos, mi esposa, mi mamá, mi abuela. Ahí digo, de verdad que sí valió la pena.
While Cristian and Katiuska are hopeful that they'll find jobs, they won't be able to work legally until they apply for asylum, a process that can take several months. In the meantime, they're getting used to a new life.
Miren la cámara.
La foto, hijo.
We have centuries of experiences and true life stories of people who came to America with nothing and ended up sending their children to college, becoming CEOs, buying homes, et cetera, et cetera. As soon as we can get these folks legal status, trust me, they're all gonna go out and find a job, because I've never seen folks who are so hungry to work.
For now, Governor Abbott continues to send buses to New York, and is expanding his program to other cities in the Northeast. And there's a glimmer of hope for the migrants stuck in Juarez. Title 42 was recently struck down by a federal judge, and the Biden administration has just weeks to figure out how to handle the likelihood of yet another surge.
We need to get our act together and do something that hadn't been done in 36 years related to immigration reform, and at least do it incrementally. Cut the political crap. It's humanitarian, and we got to figure out how to deal with it.